Students, today we will talk about process which are involved in the personal selling. Means the steps which are involved in personal selling. Here we will talk about the process, the steps which must be followed by the salesman before starting personal selling. Means agentmanship. First is preparation. Preparation is the first step which is followed by the salesman. Before going to the door-to-door interaction with the consumer, a salesman prepare well about the follow-up plan, about the presentation, about the knowledge of the product and selection of the particular area. See, one salesman cannot visit all the area of sales in one day or at one time. So he selects only a single area where he has to visit. And regarding that area, he prepares the name of the personals, the name of that particular area and full knowledge about the product. Thereafter, approach. When the salesman visits to the door at person, he just approach himself about the product and about himself. First of all, the salesman tells about himself, the company name and about the product. Means he may start by saying, hello, how are you? I am from such and such company, my name is such and such and I am here to advertise or to sell such and such product. Thereafter, presentation. Presentation is another part of the personal selling, where salesman represents the product before the consumer. He shows the product, he tells all the details of the product, all the advantage of the product and each and every feature of the product. After telling all the feature of the product, he starts convincing. This convincing is the fourth step, where after presenting the product, after telling all the features, all the advantages of the product, he starts convincing the consumer, persuading the consumer to buy the product. He may convince the consumer by saying few quotes. He may convince the consumer by reducing the price of the product. He may convince the consumer by telling the advantages of the product. And thereafter, the sixth step is closing the sales. After convincing, he closes the sales. Closing sales means physically transfer the goods to the consumer. When he convinces the consumer agree to buy the product, he just convinces the consumer. After convincing the consumer, he sell the product, means he handed over the product to the consumer. And the last step is follow plan. After selling the product, the sales may be ended, but the process is not ended, because he must follow the consumer. Means the product is useful, whether or not, what is the feedback of the consumer regarding the product, what is the demand of the consumer, what is the need of the consumer. All these things are included in follow plan. Okay, after steps of personal selling, we will talk about the qualities of good salesman. To be a good salesman, a person must have some qualities. Here I have written some qualities out of the qualities of good salesman. You can add the qualities of good salesman and you can remove also. Here the first quality is knowledge. A good salesman must have a good and appropriate knowledge about the product of the company. He must have a good knowledge about the product. Suppose that if a salesman does not have the proper knowledge about the product, how will he convince the consumer? How will he represents the product before the consumer? Another thing is good personality. A good salesman also has a good and personality. He must be good looking, he must wear good cloth, and he must talk very nicely. So these things are included in the personality. Another thing, hardworking. A good salesman is always hardworking. He presents the product before the consumer in a very good manner. He start convincing the consumer till he make agree to the consumer. He walks door to door to the consumer. So a good salesman must be hardworking. Another is smile. A good salesman must have a smile on face. See, if the salesman is crying before the consumer, he will not put a good impression on the consumer. So he must have a smiley face, he must have a smile on the face. Another is sound memory. The memory of a salesman must be very good. Suppose that a person who meets you first time and after second time when he calls you with your name, such as Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Z, it gives a good impression. So the memory of a salesman must be sound, must be very good. Another is communication skill. Communication skill is the key point for a salesman. A salesman presents the goods and convinces the consumer by his communication skill only. If he is not good in communication skill, he cannot persuade, he cannot convince the consumer. So communication skill is very essential for being a good salesman. And the last one is simplicity. A good salesman is always very simple. He looks very simple, very nice, and very calm. A good salesman must look simple and he presents goods and convinces the consumer in simple form or in the simplicity.